Hello and welcome to another episode of Breaking the Guard. I'm going to review this past UFC in Tampa, and I'm going to talk about two things later in the podcast. One, uh, what I feel the role of closed guard is in MMA and Jiu-Jitsu nowadays, and then two, the resurgence of ankle locks, particularly straight ankle locks. But let's just quickly sum up this UFC, because I did say I was going to talk about it. I did make a prediction. So spoiler alert here. I said that, the main event, Colby Covington versus Joaquin Buckley, I thought Buckley was going to win, and I was proven to be right again. And for the exact reasons that I thought it would happen, which is that Colby has been sitting on the shelf for too long, and I think he's gotten stale. He looked not great, to put it politely. He didn't look like his usual self. His shots were all far. He was always bent over shooting, and Buckley's sprawl was great. He looked like he was going for chest wraps and just really deep hips. And I mean, you could see by the physique, he's just a powerful man. And he pretty easily defended most of those early takedowns from Colby. And unfortunately for Colby, he got cut really early in the fight. It must have been like in the first couple minutes of round one. It looked like he was like ducking down a little bit, and Buckley threw an uppercut. And the uppercut didn't really land as far as it didn't connect flush, but it kind of grazed his right eyelid and sliced him open on top of the eyelid, which is a bad spot to get it in, right? Because it clearly messed him up for the rest of the fight. He kept leaking into his eye. He kept grabbing his eye and then trying to smear the blood off, because unfortunately when you get the cut in the eyelid, there's going to get blood in your eye, right? So that's obviously another factor in it as well. I don't know if that was everything, because just movement-wise, he didn't look good. And he was just getting tagged a whole bunch. And credit to him, though, his chin's solid. Didn't look like he got rocked once, although he got hit flush many times. Buckley was just finding the mark, stopping all the shots. He did score a takedown, I believe, in round two, but did zero damage, and Buckley stayed calm. Although I would say, well, I guess I had to look back now, because at the moment, I'm like, man, Buckley has no jiu-jitsu whatsoever, because he got taken down and instantly side-mounted. But that might have been a tactic, because he did stay safe from side mount. He did not get hit once, and he was controlling. And the moment that Colby tried to advance, he backed up to his feet. And he got taken down another time and did a similar strategy. So that might have been part of the game plan to allow Colby to pass, because one of the things is, if you do stay in a bottom guard, you are going to get hit a lot more, because it's harder to get up because your legs are entangled. So now you can't just stand up, right? Like you have to extract one of your legs to create the hip, because if your hips are pointed up, you're not going to get up to your feet, right? You have, at some point, your hips have to point down, and when you have your legs entangled, you can't turn your hips down, right? You got to free one of those legs to turn them in. Anyhow, so that might have been a tactic, but Colby wasn't really able to do any damage to this guy. The most that he did was bleed a whole lot of them, particularly in the third round. It looked like Buckley did a good amount of damage. Colby was looking really rough, and at one point it looked like he just conceded bottom position, and Buckley stopped playing defensive and actually fought him on the ground, started pounding him out a bit. And that's when you could start seeing the very thick blood. I mean, it was like matted thick on his knee, on the mat. It was becoming pretty slippery. At one point, Buckley even went for a rear triangle, but it slid off and then gave Colby some top time inside his close guard. However, at that point, when I saw the thick blood, I was thinking to myself, this fight's over, because there's no way the doctor's going to let this go in the third round. And sure enough, they stopped it with 30 seconds in the third round to let the doctor look at it. They called the fight off, and his cut had grown significantly. It went from like this to almost all the way across the eyebrow, to the point where the doctor on camera said he's going to lose his eyelid, right? So Unfortunate for Colby, but it was a doctor stoppage. I did get that pick right. I think I have to start betting on these fights. I've been on a good streak as far as picking winners. I think I'm 14 for 16, so maybe I should be doing that. But that was that fight. And we had some good fights. Well, I'll tell you, I was watching the undercard while I was lifting, and I'm like, oh, undercard's pretty rough because it was decision, 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 decision. But once it got to, who was it? I think, oh, Woodson. Fernando Padilla and Woodson, it started becoming a KO factory, right? There was like a knockout there. Joel Alvarez was a crazy knockout. Michael Johnson, again, I think he's 41, still showing he's got it. He can connect a nasty right hook, knockout. Dustin Jacoby with a knockout. Manuel Cape. Manuel Cape. That was crazy. He got kicked in the nuts 3 times in that fight, and he was whooping that guy. And I hate seeing it, man, because I know some people who've never been kicked hard in the nuts think like he's hamming it up. Like, dude, it hurts. I've been kicked so hard once that I could not stand up for 30 minutes. And I wanted to because it was my brother who kicked me in the nuts by accident. I was throwing a roundhouse kick. He threw a step side kick. And it was just, if you know how those look, not a winning combination for me. The squared heel into the testicles. And I dropped, and he thought it was funny. We're 18 and 19, whatever. And I was mad and I wanted to get back at him, but I couldn't get up to my feet. Like I would get to my knees and then just fall over, so it really does impair you a lot. And even with a groin cup, the groin cup doesn't always save you. Sometimes it could pinch you, right? Like you have a little bit hanging off to the side and they hit the top of the cup and the cup tilts and now it just smashed you, right? So, the cup's not always the best thing as far as like it's not always going to protect you 100%. So, yeah, but he went out and then he scored a finish at the very end of the fight. Ironically, it looked like he also landed somewhat of a low blow. I would have to see it again. It might have been a low body shot, but it definitely was low because it caught him somewhere like close to the groin area, if not the groin area. But the ref didn't play a role in it. And I saw some people complaining about that. I'm like, you live by the sword, die by the sword, Finally, Cub Swanson, Billy Quarantillo. Billy's been on a roll, and, Cub is also another guy pushing 40. I think he is 40. And scored a vicious knockout in the 3rd round, too. So, good fights for a free card and the last UFC of the year. Not bad. I will say one thing about timing. The disparity between Colby Covington and Joaquin Buckley, to me, is all about timing, right? Colby now is 37. I didn't realize he's, in the fight years, he's old, right? He's been in the UFC for 10 years. He's had 17 fights. Joaquin Buckley, I didn't get his age. He's 30. Okay, so he's moving into the prime years of his life. He's had 15 fights in 4 years in the UFC. That's a lot. But that also means he is primed. And he is obviously on this uphill trajectory. He's got a 6-fight win streak now. He was entering this fight with 5 fights won. He's in this new weight class. That's obviously been a big boost to his career. Whereas Colby looks like he's been doing the Conor McGregor, which is doing a lot of media, a lot of talking, not a lot of fighting, right? Like I said before, he's been fighting once a year for the past 4 years, and then they had 2 fights the year before, 1 fight the year before that. So not a lot of activity, right? And in this game, if you're not fighting a lot, as a younger man, you're wasting your opportunity because when you're his age now, yeah, maybe 1 to 2 fights a year is all your body could handle, right? But when you're a young man, you can do those 3 to 4 fight years And if you're being smart, staying in shape all year round, you can handle it, right? And you're gonna get a lot of valuable experience, and you're gonna keep the sword sharp. But if you're fighting once a year, man, like you're really pushing your expectations as far as like what you're gonna get done. You don't have enough time, and you're not gonna have enough experience to build. And I think clearly he looked very rusty, right? Didn't look like he had good timing on his takedowns or good setups. Wasn't able to get anything going. I mean, it looked bad from the first round. Like he was shooting and then pulling guard, kind of. I mean, he would shoot and then just stay on his back, hoping that Buckley would engage with him. Like it did not look good at all, right? Yeah, that was a bad look. Like his stock definitely dropped considerably. He's not going to be in the top 10 after that fight. Maybe not even in the top 15 because he looked horrible, right? At least that was my take. Compared to what I've seen him before, where he could really push the pace, he didn't look like he was getting tired, but he wasn't pushing pace either, right? So you have to be careful when you find a moment where you're hot, right? And there's clearly a moment in Colby's career where he was hot, right? And if I look back at his record here, that would have been from 2016. And look at the contrast here. In 2016, wins 1 fight, 2 fight, 3 fight, 4 fight. 4 fights with Brian Barberena, Max Griffin, Jonathan Manier. Oh, 3 fights, I'm sorry. And then he goes into 2017, beats Damian Maia. He beats Dos Anjos. He beats Robbie Lawler. So, like, he's clearly on this uphill path at that point. But he then slows his pace significantly, right? And now I get it. He fought Kamaru Usman for a title and basically took a year off, right? And his next fight was Woodley, 1-1. Waited a year for the rematch, fought Usman, lost. Waited another year, fought Masvidal, won. Waited another year, fought Leon Edwards, lost, right? So, and then another year, fought Buckley, right? So I think when you're chasing these big money fights, and I mean, I get it. If you can get a chance for a title, I guess you kind of had to wait. But, I think that cost him. And not to mention his whole legal battle with Masvidal, who was a former training partner, former roommate of his. And, the whole sucker punch thing, you had, took him to court over it. That's a lot of distractions, And I think that plays a role. When you get too much into things outside of fighting, and the whole media circus, and then you're doing legal stuff, and you're worried about money, and you're not worrying about fighting, which is what you got into the whole in the beginning. I think you lost the plot, right? For me, fighting was always about fighting. It wasn't about how I'm going to make money. Oh, let me fight. Because that would be the stupidest thing you could ever say. There's many easier ways to make a lot of money than fighting. And most people don't make a lot of money fighting, right? It's difficult. This is something that you do because you enjoy it. You like the challenge. You like the puzzle that it presents to you. And yes, I want to make money doing it as well because I want to be able to pay for groceries, support my family, and all that. But is this the ultimate way of cashing a check? Absolutely not, right? So that's something to think about if you're a younger fighter, about timing. Where do you want to go? How far do you want to go? And how are you going to spend your time? Because in my opinion, he might have not spent his time wisely in these last few years, right? And I think at this point, if this is like Colby, peaked, he doesn't have excuses about his training camp. He felt everything was great. Like, it's time to hang him up now, because it's only going to get worse from here, right? Yeah, because that was not great. And for somebody who relied on that grind ability, he clearly wasn't able to impose that, right? So, like I said, maybe this was just a really off night. maybe I'm right that he was very distracted and that he didn't get the right training, so he can come back and show what we expect to see of someone like Colby. But if that isn't there anymore, then yeah, to me, you're done, right? Whereas someone like Buckley, sky's the limit right now. I would definitely say though, take down defense, keep working on it, and ground defense, keep working on it a lot, because the upper tier guys are definitely going to try to take you down, right? Because me seeing that fight, what I see is if I get this guy to the ground, he's going to make a lot of mistakes, right? And now he's a strong, powerful guy, so he was able, and I think they did some good things with him about getting back up to his feet, not worrying so much about jiu-jitsu points, like, oh, the guy goes score side mount. Like, that's not a big deal, right? And there's no points in jiu-jitsu and MMA, so like, as long as they get up, it's fine, right? Especially if the guy's not doing any damage. I think that's something to think about also, right? Like, sometimes because you do a lot of jiu-jitsu, you forget that, it's actually easier to stand up from side mount than it is from half guard, especially when the guy doesn't have good grips, right? So it might be beneficial to you to actually let the guy stand up. To let the guy pass so that you can get up to your feet easier. I know as a top guy in MMA, if I want to keep the guy down, I would prefer to keep him half guard, because I am basically, in wrestling, we have what it's called a Turk on the bottom leg, the trap leg. So that hip is not going to effectively be able to escape. And then if I use some upper body pin, like an underhook or an overhook, right, or like crossface, I can keep him down and just wail away at the body a bit and wear him down first. I don't want to jump immediately into side mount when the guy's very fresh, because, like I said, it's easier to get away. But if I wear him down a bit first, then I can go into side mount, look for a strong pin like a crucifix, and finish from there, right? So, but needless, I think it was evident that his ground game wasn't that great. So that would be the thing. If I was Buckley, I'd be putting a lot of time into. His wrestling defense looked pretty good. His sprawl looked great. He did get taken down off the fence. And not because he didn't know what he was doing. Colby's a great wrestler, so he was able to do it. But I feel like somebody who's a really strong ground guy, like you put him against Chimaev, right? Or, the Mongolian kid that just won against Ian Gary, they're going to destroy him on the ground. I think I had the right weight class, right? I think that's the same weight class. So, yeah, they have to, or Kamaru Usman, for sure, if he's not suffering, as far as getting too old and the knee's not working well and now he's not able to score his takedowns, for sure take him down and hold him down. So he needs to work on that ground game a bit more, be even more wrestling defensive so he can keep the fight on his feet. And I would say also for a guy who's very explosive, powerful, good pacing, didn't fatigue. He looked sharp going into the third round. Slowed a little bit, but not faded for sure. It would have been good to see how he would have handled rounds 4 and 5, right? Because that's usually the question that you have with guys who are very powerful and explosive. How are they going to fare in the late rounds, right? Because that's when that type of fast twitch muscle really starts to fail you, right? Because you no longer have all that explosiveness. Now it's just whatever's left, and if you're not used to not having explosiveness, it's rough when you don't have it, right? Because now you can't just spaz your way out of things. You have to, methodically prevent or calculate your escapes. But enough about that. Let's go into now something I foreshadowed earlier, which is closed guard in MMA and in Jiu-Jitsu, right? I covered on Friday that there was a lot of people trashing on Crone for his closed guard pulls. And not even pulls, really. He was jumping closed guard in MMA. And unfortunately for him, it ended in disaster when Bryce was able to knock him out because of it. Closed guard still works, right? In fact, he almost proved it in his fight because he got 2 really tight arm bars. One of them looked like it could have finished, but Bryce was able to escape. So, and Bryce is a really good jiu-jitsu guy himself, one of the few people to pull off a twister in the UFC, so it's not like he's a slouch on the ground. But I feel when you are jumping into a closed guard, it's a very weak sport move, right? No one in the street fight should be jumping closed guard. And by that, I mean your opponent is standing and I'm going to latch onto him like a woman who sees their long lost husband in the movies and just jumps for the embrace, right? That's a lot of trust that you're putting in that person, right? And, when it's your spouse, okay, of course you're going to trust them. But if it's someone who's trying to break your face, you should never be trusting that person because they could slam the hell out of you. And you're relying also on the softness and the bounce of cage mats to not hurt you, right? Again, I'm cracking on this because, in the UFC or like the Gracies, they like to say, oh, we do, real self-defense, not sport stuff. That is sport technique. Okay, you try jumping a closed guard on concrete and having your opponent slam you, and tell me how wise of a decision that was or how street safe that was, right? Because it absolutely is terrible. You're gonna get knocked out or killed, right? And even Grown pretty much got knocked out because when Bryce put that forearm in and then guard slammed him from the feet, the forearm slammed the guy's Crone's chin, and then the back of his head hit the mat. And even the soft mats, it's still a lot of damage that was done there, right? Imagine on concrete. So to me, that type of pull is atrocious, right? You should not be doing that. That is a very sport move. Now, if you're in the sport, there are times that you can do that, and I would say you're desperate at that point to get the fight to the ground. Because to me, the better way of pulling guard would be to pull, which implies that I'm going to pull him in. I am controlling the fall. Essentially, I'm taking him down, but I'm putting myself on my back, right? Versus when you jump guard, you're letting your opponent decide how the ground is going to come into play, right? Is he going to slam me down? Is he just going to put me down? Again, that's why I said like you're trusting that guy to not hurt you, which is silly, right? Because they want to hurt you. If you pull guard though, you're now sucking them in, right? And as a result, you're controlling the landing, which is not going to be as harsh. And you're probably going to land in a better spot to attack, right? So that's one thing, right? Don't jump guard, pull guard, right? The only type of guard that you can think about jumping off the top of my head that would make sense would be a guillotine, right? Jumping a guillotine is not terrible. It's not great. It would still suck in a street fight, but keep in mind, his head is next to your lat on the floor. So if he slams you, guess what? He's also slamming his own head, right? So not great for them either, right? And I've known, like I've even done this sometimes where I got a double leg and I slam somebody on a wrestling mat and I rock myself because my head cracks into their hip, So slamming does have some danger factors to it as well. But caveat, you jump the guard, but you have a guillotine. Not great, but it's not terrible either, right? Like usually you're in a better position to survive those falls because if you're doing a guillotine good, you're kind of caved in this way. So at least the back of your head is further away from the mat, less likely for you to ricochet hard off of it versus if you jump guard stiff here. Now, like there's a better chance your head could bounce. And the fact that their head is going to be rushing into the mat, they have to be a bit more careful how they place you down as well. In any case, pulling guard is better, or even sitting to a guard is better, right? Now the problem with sitting to a guard is most people won't engage with you, right? But at least when you pull a guard, you're being a little bit more proactive, right? Like you're getting them to fall forward into you, and then you quote unquote jump your guard, but they're already on their way down, so you've made the fall happen. I would say that, right? As far as strategically, once you get the fight to the ground, close guard still works quite well, right? In fact, I play it a lot. One of the guys I play it the most with is probably Jake Shields, because Jake is so good at passing open guards and half guards. It is difficult to play an open game with him. He's got great head positioning, got great hips. You guys heard me talk about him before. Like I've picked up a lot of passing techniques just off of him, so I know also how to defend him. But if I leave him in a strong position for a long time, he will pass my guard. So for me, one of the best ways to nullify his game is to put him into a closed guard. All right. Now, if your closed guard is passive and doesn't do anything, then yeah, you're probably going to feel like, oh, this kind of sucks. If this is MMA, he can punch me and stuff like that. But I tend to play a very active closed guard, and not by opening my guard because I don't want to be closed. I like using overhooks a lot because for MMA, I try to get the overhook, far wrist control, get the pin in the bottom side, because now I can punch with my free hand, and then I can set up my diamond pin, and which also opens up triangles and arm bars, omoplatas, right? And it's like the one position off your back where you have a pin and you could do damage and your opponent can't, right? And particularly with elbows, since their face is so close, strong position, right? And the overhook guard to me is another position which everybody could play that makes it very hard for the top guy to strike effectively, because the more he punches, the more he opens himself to triangles, right? Basically, because you have the one arm wrapped. When he throws this way, now my leg goes over his shoulder, easy triangle setup. I also like setting up the puppet master there, which striking makes easy as well. So a lot of tools from that guard. The other one I play a lot, which should come to no surprise, is reverse Kimura series, right? Where I work a lot into just using the reverse Kimura. I use the arm drag from there, use omoplata from there, the triangle, the flower sweep, right? So there's a lot of stuff you can do playing a closed guard that keeps the top guy busy and with its posture broken. What you don't want is a guy sitting upright in your closed guard and you're kind of just holding on to the guard to keep him from passing, but you're not controlling his posture. That type of closed guard is dead, right? That's not going to work well. And the days of people putting their hands on your neck or shoulder are mostly gone. So you're not going to get the easy armbar setups from people just, giving you bad posture, right? So you have to constantly be engaged in breaking posture. Now, I don't really have the game or the flexibility to play rubber guard. If I did, I would, because it's a great game for MMA as well, because it's one of those positions, once again, that you break people's posture. I think rubber guard can't be spammed, in that if you try to force it too much, it doesn't really work. But if you're playing these other types of games and then you work into a rubber guard every so often, it can really throw someone for a loop. Especially when they're trying to hold you down. And this is when I've talked about this type of concept before, which is when I want to try to make space, they're going to try to close space. So, and then you can use that to your advantage. So like if I want to play a rubber guard game, I don't want to play a tight guard game because he's going to be weary of that and make a lot of space. So instead, I'm going to try to stand up a lot, right? So when I do that, the best way for them to counter that is to try to stay really tight with you. And now that they're playing really tight with me, I can take advantage and go into a rubber guard very easily using their method of trying to counter my stand-up ability to my advantage. And then when they do make space, then it becomes easier to stand up, right? So you got to play both sides of this there. So to me, that's like one of the key functions of a good rubber guard there. You're going to give yourself opportunities to escape, not to mention the opportunity to submit if they get stuck in it. But that type of closed guard works well, right? An active closed guard where the opponent's posture is broken. What doesn't work well when they're postured up. And if you're playing that type of closed guard, it's not going to last long, right? I think, was it Eric Paulson who had done a study of closed guard in MMA, but this is like 90s. uh, MMA, and he said that it was an average of 3 minutes of a fight where the closed guard was an effective defense before it no longer was able to control the opponent, and it just resulted in getting someone beat down. And the conclusion of that uh, study to him was that you can't be on your back in MMA, right? Like if you're planning to stay 3 rounds off your back, you're gonna lose. You know. Now, I think that's true to the point that, well, that's probably true regardless, because the way judges score things, they see a guy on top of you, they're going to give the round to him, even if he doesn't do anything, which is silly. It's funny because I saw someone saying, oh, Colby won round 2 against Buckley because he finished the round on top, despite doing 0 damage. And it's like, no. He got his ass whooped for that round. He got 1 takedown, and then, Joaquin got up. It's like, it doesn't count, right? Like, you got to do damage. Like, to me, takedowns only count if you hurt the guy doing the takedown, like a big slam or a hip throw or suplex. But if I just, trip the guy and he falls to his butt, it's like, what are you going to do with that on the ground that really matters? Anyhow, so yeah, playing off your back for a long-term MMA fight is probably not going to work out well, right? Just from the scoring criteria. But you can control people quite well if you have a good guard, right? Striking does change things, but if you account for controlling, like I said, using something like an overhook guard or using like the reverse kimura, you already got one of their arms pinned, they only have one hand to use, and using that hand opens up your submission game. So like it kind of makes them a lot more weary of using it, and they end up having to try to escape the position rather than trying to attack. And when I could put them when I'm on the offensive, they're on the defensive, I'm safe now, right? I'm not getting hit. So closed guard does work. And in jiu-jitsu, works great too, right? Especially since there's no striking threat, you can do a lot of control there. If you fight a long leg guy, the last place you want to be in is in the closed guard, because especially if they're flexible, because the legs are flying everywhere. Like as a top guy, I don't want to be in their closed guard. I want to be in their half guard, or in the headquarters, not in the closed, because I have extra work to do now to try to get out of this position. So don't get it twisted. Playing old school closed guard is going to get you beat. Playing a more modern or more active closed guard will keep you safe and get you wins. That's my take on it anyways. And the last thing I'll talk about here, straight ankle locks. They're making a comeback hard. And I didn't watch actively the No-Gi World Championships that just passed here in Vegas. I did see lots of clips in black belt finals, and I saw lots of straight ankle locks, right? And not just Aoki locks, which is like a variation. It's not really a straight ankle lock, but similar position. But there were a lot of just classical straight Achilles holds. And it's funny because we see this happen in jiu-jitsu all the time, just like it happens in every other, aspect of life, where what's old becomes new again, right? And all sorts of grips. I've seen a lot of, classical figure 4 straight ankle lock grips and getting finishes. So even though I like to dog on that, it obviously still works well. Someone is making the claim that, because I like doing a guillotine style grip, because I feel like I can get a lot more lift off my hands, right? Whereas when I do a figure 4, my hand is lower, so I'm not going to get as much lift. Although, and especially if you're holding on to their shin, right? My lever is not high, right? So like I'm just here, right? So if this ankle was here, if I do a guillotine, or the way I call it ball and socket grip, where I come here and I start to lift up, I can get a lot of crank on that hand. And the higher this hand is, obviously the more closed this grip is, and it'll be stronger. But when you're doing a figure 4 here and holding their shin, you're not really getting that much over there. You do get some extension, I guess, on the shin, which you might say is going to allow you to push your shoulder a little more effectively. And obviously it works, but as far as which one's better, I like this. I will say someone brought up an interesting one, where what if you did the figure 4, but rather than holding onto the shin, I just curl up. it's like, okay, now you have a little more of my attention, because at least now, since I get to curl this arm up more, if you guys see, the more you curl up your arm, you see how my hand gets pushed, because basically the space between the pit of the elbow is closed by my bicep and my forearm. So now the hand has to rest higher. And I know for reverse figure four, which I do like, I do that sometimes. And sometimes I still grab the shin as well. Old habits die hard, what can I tell you? But anyhow, the straight ankle locks are definitely in play. And there's a lot more threat now, especially with the Aoki lock, because the common escape for the straight ankle locks was just to pull your foot out. But now that Aoki locks are such a thing, pulling your foot out is a very dangerous thing to do, because if you just pulled the heel out, you just put yourself in an Aoki lock, because now you got your heel on their chest, and now they're getting that twisting Aoki lock. So it's made that footlock game a lot more dangerous, right? And I think the other factor is that it's a lot easier to control straight ankle lock than it is a heel hook, right? Because the heel hook slips. You don't really slip out of a straight ankle lock, because I'm wrapped all the way around it, usually pretty tight, and especially if I'm doing a figure four, I'm kind of holding your shin a little bit so your leg's not going to spin as easy. And I usually have some type of leg entanglement, like whether it's ashigarami or we see double outside ashi, right? Or sometimes people are doing the game over. So your legs are kind of stuck in there and not an easy position to work out of. I think it's great. I remember telling my brother like 6 months ago, I think, or maybe it was more than that, like we need to start pushing more straight ankle locks in the students, because everybody's going too hard on heel hooks, and it's gonna be overplayed. And sure enough, jiu-jitsu caught on to what we were thinking, because in this no-gi worlds, there were a lot of straight ankle lock finishes I've seen in even the EBIs and the PFLs. There have been a lot of straight ankle finishes. I think perhaps the Aoki lock helped bring that into more attention. When the Aoki lock started getting popular, it's like, what's the best way to get Aoki lock? Well, start from a good straight ankle lock. And it's a good synergy between those two submissions, much like how heel hooks and knee bars and toe holds kind of go well together. So too do those straight ankle lock Aoki locks. And Aoki locks weren't a thing back in the day. Like, I didn't know about Aoki locks until, the modern era. I was just doing straight ankle locks. When they would turn away, it would become either heel hook, knee bar, toe hold. So it's a great addition to the tool set. And I think that's helped spur that straight footlock resurgence, if you will. So I'm all for it. I like those. I think I'd rather get caught with a straight ankle lock than a heel hook. I'll tell you what. Straight ankle locks, if you get your ankle popped from a straight extension, usually not too bad. As long as you didn't sever your Achilles, you're usually fine in a week. But a heel hook, yeah, it's gonna ruin your month, your year. So it would be nice to see that pick up a lot more steam. And I mean, it has, so it's nice to see that. I like seeing what's old become new again. And I think the techniques have come a lot cleaner. You see a lot of people playing the straight ankle lock game with deli hilo hooks instead of going, the classic reap. So it's cool stuff, right? That's the one thing I love about jiu-jitsu. More than any other sport, it's adapting very fast, right? MMA is still kind of slow, right? Like I said before, I feel like MMA is still really behind as far as the progression of the athletes. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, man, the progression of technique is light speed, and it's constantly evolving. So it makes it very fun to watch. Anyhow, that's all I have for you guys for this week. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you all next week.